Is there a way, again, to stem this, and is it the responsibility, if we move beyond, again, the diaspora and the political pressure, is the White House, as you understand it, you're familiar with Washington politics, you've been aligned with probably one of the most successful presidents and presidencies, that of William Jefferson Clinton. You know the Clintons well. You've been supportive of them. You're supportive of Hillary against Barack Obama in 2008. You have a deep understanding of how Washington works. What are we not doing, both in Puerto Rico and the members of the diaspora, the elected officials? We have 4 members of Congress, 1 from Chicago, 2 from New York, and Labrador, I don't even know where he's from, but Idaho, I think it is, right. And he's a Republican.
And Pierluisi is a member of Congress also.
Right, but he's a non-voting, you know, yeah. But he's, well, they listen to him.
Yeah.
So where are we failing? It seems that Washington, who is in part responsible for the mess that we have here, the limbo status. We go back to the status and not injecting it as, you know, can't blame it for everything that happens. What is Washington not getting straight? We allegedly have friends of Puerto Rico. Every senator that you, when they get times for election, they're friends, oh, Puerto Rico, amigo, amigo, but they really are not dealing with the real problem, which is the crux of the way they strangle the economy. We can't do our own negotiating, we can't do our own trading. Part of that is also the problem that strangles the island.
We don't get equal treatment in programs to which we have been taxed equally. Medicare.
Can you explain that to viewers?
For example, all my life, since I had my first job when I was 17 years old, they've taken away the same percentage of my salary that you pay for Medicare. Now, when I turn 65, the health providers that will be giving me Medicare service to me here in Puerto Rico will get paid 2/3 of what health providers in New York will get paid for providing the same services. So if I go to the Hospital del Maestro will get paid 2/3 of what Lincoln Hospital in the Bronx gets paid for giving exactly the same service. That's extremely unfair. And what it does, it denies Puerto Rico's economy and Puerto Rico's medical economy hundreds of millions of dollars every year. If the CMS would provide exactly the same funding to these healthcare providers in Puerto Rico, well then nurses would be paid better in Puerto Rico and would not have to be flying out to Buffalo or Rochester to get paid twice to withstand the winters of Buffalo instead of being able to stay in Puerto Rico and provide their professional services in Puerto Rico. Medical doctors, particularly specialists, will not have to leave the island because they're only getting paid $7 or $6 or $5 for taking care of you for 15 minutes in an appointment. Those are not rates that you should be paying a doctor for specialty and subspecialty services in Puerto Rico. So then they move there, and then their patients have to follow right behind. The only reason I would consider leaving Puerto Rico, not now, maybe after I'm 65 or something like that, would be if I become convinced that living in Puerto Rico is a life-threatening experience for me. If I see that in many communities in the States, an ambulance will be there 7 minutes after you have a heart attack versus 25 minutes here, that's life-threatening. If I see that I have to be pulling strings to get an appointment with certain doctors, las palas in Spanish, because waiting the regular, they'll give you an appointment for in 6 months' time or something like that, an endocrinologist or something like that. For example, in Puerto Rico, we have only 2 pediatric endocrinologists in the jurisdiction that probably has the highest rate of type 1 and type 2 diabetes in the nation. And then I think the number of endocrinologists per patient here is something like 1 endocrinologist for every 75,000 patients or something like that. I may have the numbers wrong, but it's a disproportionate lack of specialists in Puerto Rico. And it starts getting to the point, and there's a lot of people that now live in Florida, not because they didn't find a job here. They had a job here. but they want better medical service there. Or they were retired here, but as they get older, they want to make sure that they have around them what they need to be able to postpone their death as much as possible. You know, wherever you live in New York City, you punch the panic button and an ambulance will be there in a short period of time. And they will take you to very good hospitals that get paid well by your health insurance or whatever. We don't have that here. At the time that Obamacare was able to enroll, I think it was 8 million people, and they thought that they wouldn't reach 7 million. They oversubscribed based on their estimates. In Puerto Rico, they did a campaign to subscribe uninsured people. There were 130,000 people eligible and less than 20,000 enrolled. They expected to enroll 130,000, less than 20,000 enrolled. You don't read about that in the national media because the local media here doesn't cover it either. It's too difficult to explain and to understand. And the government certainly wasn't going to talk about its own failures. And the reason for that is because under Obamacare, we get less than we get on the mainland, even though we pay Medicare just like anybody else pays for Medicare. So, and they're not saving any money because if you don't get the service here, I'll go visit my cousin Gerson and use his address in New York City to get services there, and they will be reimbursed by the federal government. So if they think that in a highly mobile society like ours, that things are not going to happen. I had a first cousin in the 1990s who was a terminal AIDS patient. He spent his last few months away from his family in New York City because he could get there the quality end of life care that was not available to him here.
You know, as we said earlier, you co-chaired Hillary Clinton's primary campaign here in Puerto Rico. You've been the highest-ranking Democrat in Puerto Rico. What is your impression of the Obama administration, the way that they've dealt with Puerto Rico? I mean, it's, you know, you talked about how it's a confusing issue with Medicare. That's why it's not written about. I'm personally confused about, for instance, the plebiscite in 2012, the first time that statehood won on the ballot, and I know that's a controversial outcome. You probably don't think it's controversial, but it seemed like the president was ready to embrace a move towards statehood, and then he immediately dialed it back, and then it seemed like that just got forgotten about.
Well, before I get into political status, where I do have some differences with the administration, President Obama had us included in the first months in office fully in the ARA economic stimulus program, and Puerto Rico is very grateful for that. And when Obamacare came around, it's true that it was an imperfect program under imperfect political circumstances in Washington, where the Republicans did not allow for the bill to be perfected through the normal bicameral process. But they did get us a significant increase in funding, but it was done by patchwork. And right now, we confront a cliff in 2019, of which the president of the Medical Doctors Guild in Puerto Rico, Dr. Victor Ramos, has been talking about, that if it's not fixed in 2019, Puerto Rico drops from full participation in whatever we're participating now to no participation from one day to the next. And it takes several years for Congress to move around and realize that they gotta fix that. So, but he did get us included in Obamacare. We're grateful for that. We're also grateful for the fact that he had a very forthcoming report by the White House Task Force on Puerto Rico's political status in March of 2011, where he set out a clear roadmap where he said that he wanted to get political status resolved by 2016. Then we tried to get the bill through in the Congress. We didn't get as much support as we expected from the White House for that legislation, although it passed the House and then passed the Senate. And he didn't make it part of his do or die agenda. If you make it part of your do or die agenda, then he could have gotten enough Democrats on board in the Senate to deal with the situation. So what happens? We then did our own plebiscite following the strictures, the parameters set forth in the White House Task Force report. They wanted to do a two-step process. We did a two-question process because a two-step process would have been pretty expensive. You would have to redo it twice, and we decided to do it the day of the elections so that, yes, you have to incur the expense of ballots and orientation and all that, but you know, people are going to vote there anyway, the poll watchers are there and all that. And then he recognized that that was a victory for statehood. First, they wishy-washed a little bit for a few hours because they had a lot of politicians calling from the diaspora saying, you know, don't be too clear on that. But then he said, look, in American democracy, only those that vote are the ones that count. And among those that made a choice, statehood got 61%. And after that, nothing happened. So yes, there is concern that he reneged on that. And you know what? That is going to cost the Democratic Party. Because in Central Florida, there's a higher percentage of pro-American Puerto Ricans than there are in Puerto Rico. If all the private polling I've seen over the years indicates that there's several percentage points more for statehood in Central Florida and several percentage points less for the status quo in Central Florida. In 2000, when Al Gore talked about self-determination and pushed the right buttons to indicate that he would welcome statehood if people supported statehood for Puerto Rico, he was the first Democratic candidate for president that won Orange County since LBJ in 1964. 2 years later, Jeb Bush punched exactly the same buttons. And people who voted for Al Gore in 2000 voted for Jeb Bush in 2002. So that demonstrates that for the swing Puerto Rican voter, in the swing I-4 corridor, in the swing state of Florida, Puerto Ricans vote like they vote in Puerto Rico. Their number one issue is political status. Everything else is secondary. And you say, oh, but they've been away for many years. You know what? Gerson Borrero reads Puerto Rico's newspapers as precisely as he reads New York City's newspapers every day. And every day it's easier for him to do so because now he can do it on the internet. And El Vocero's for free. You got to pay a subscription for an Nuevo Dia, but you get the news. And one of our TV stations here is now a superstation, which is Guapa America. Right. So if you have it in your cable lineup, you watch the same TV programs that we watch here. The good, the bad, and the ugly. All kinds of things.
I'm sorry, let me just ask one follow-up question here. You know, you made it so clear that the status issue is the most important issue that has to be grappled with. But here you're painting the picture of the president didn't put his political capital on the line to push the status issue in Congress. You were saying that because of the disparate representation for Puerto Rico, you have to go to other senators in other states to carry the issue, and that's never going to be their number one priority. And so it seems like you're going to be at forever an impasse because nobody is going to have the political motivation to go out on a limb and to solve the status issue. But meanwhile, there is this paralysis that transpires here in Puerto Rico because the issue is unresolved. And so that's what I was trying to touch upon in the beginning, is that, yes, of course, the status issue is paramount, but it depends upon an external factor which you cannot command, and it doesn't seem like that external factor will come around to resolving it.
Yeah. Well, there's some patchwork that we could do here if we talk more with each other. And we try to seek consensus solutions to our common problems. But I'll give you an example. We have a sales tax in Puerto Rico. And if we don't collect more of our revenue that should be paid for in the sales tax, is because we have not indicted and convicted 3 people in Puerto Rico. Only 3 people. You have to take one small merchant one medium-sized merchant, and one executive from a big box chain, that you can create a good case that they have not turned into the Treasury Department some of the proceeds from the sales tax that they've collected from people. And indict them not for tax evasion, indict them for appropriating illegally public funds. Because the moment I, as a merchant, collect $1.07 from you and do not remit the 7 cents to the Treasury Department, I am stealing public funds, just as if I were a politician in office stealing public funds. And you can charge that person with a crime that, contrary to tax evasion, has no parole. So you'll be sent to jail for at least 3 years. And when all the small merchants in Puerto Rico, and all the medium-sized merchants in Puerto Rico, and all the big box merchants in Puerto Rico see 3 friends going to jail for 3 years, and you know, it's not worth it. I'm not going to keep the $1,000 that I was keeping from the sales tax proceeds every month to help pay for the fishing boat that I have out in Fajardo. I'll do away with that. And there you would have seen a significant increase. It wouldn't go from 57 to 100%, but it would go from 57 to 75 or 80%. And that would generate hundreds of millions of dollars a year in additional revenue. We should do that, and we never have. Neither under Acevedo Vila's administration, nor under our Fortuño administration, and not under the Garcia Padilla administration.
So far.
So far. The other day, they indicted 3 merchants or 2 merchants. They pleaded away the case, and no newspaper has reported it. They report, oh, we've arrested people. What happened to them? Journalists normally have too short a memory here to remember to follow up on the stories and make it as much a front page story that was pleaded away as they made a front page story, the arrest and the perp walks and all that kind of thing. Now,
City and State has reported it now.
Yeah, and now right now, the administration now, 2 years before the next election, 2 years before they will probably be out of office, and I'm not saying that on a partisan basis, I'm saying it on a historical basis. Now they want to
what do you mean that, historical basis? If you can just, what do you mean historical?
Governor Garcia Padilla, 4 years. Governor Fortuño, 4 years. Governor Acevedo Vilá, 4 years. Governor Sila Calderón, 4 years. And Governor Rosselló from 97 to 2000. In the past 5 terms, we've had 5 governors.
How do you explain the turnover?
Huh?
What is it because the people?
We have constant turnover every 4 years.
How do you explain the turnover?
Yeah.
We could go into a long explanation on that, but the fact is that history tells us that probably the next governor is not going to be the current governor.
So the divisiveness is such that no one seems to
stay for 8 years.
Okay, so that's a certain vote of no confidence to whoever is in power, no matter what party they represent.
In 2016, the last governor to have been elected, who later served for 2 terms, would have been elected a quarter century before.
And that being?
Rosselló was elected in 92, 24 years before.
Who was a pro-statehood also.
But regardless
right,
of pro-statehood, it's our last 2-term governor will have been elected for the first time 24 years before 2016.
Let me ask you, bring you back to something that is germane.
But let me finish with one point I was trying to make.
Okay, go ahead.
And we have the sales tax. We could raise the sales tax, or we could, through what I mentioned, try to increase the collections with the current rate. We don't do that. So what are we doing? The current administration is switching to value-added tax. Now, a value-added tax is something on which you will never have consensus and will probably be eliminated as soon as a current minority party comes into office. Why? Tell me one state that has a value-added tax. None. Out of 50, none. Now, is that the step to take to try to be inclusive and reach a consensus? No. You have to work with what you have, the sales tax. See how you can improve on that. And there are many states that can give you ideas on how they have improved the collection of their sales tax. And I'm just mentioning one single issue. Now, go ahead.
With regards to clarifying the position, because this is an important statement that I don't know if it was intentional in part to say it, but the diaspora and what the voting bloc is turning into in Florida with the influx of new Puerto Ricans who seem to carry more so than the Puerto Ricans in New York, the concern for the status issue, where I know for a fact that New York Puerto Ricans were more concerned with the well-being, the economy, the rising wave of crime, etc. If I'm not mistaken, back in 2009, January 2nd, then Governor Luis Fortuño being sworn in, right in El Capitolio, I was there, I was covering it. There was a letter sent from President-elect Obama, sent an emissary. I think you were at that swearing in.
I was the master of ceremonies.
And that's why I'm being cute here, if you will, because he read the letter. And you recall what that letter said? It said that, in fact, in his first 4 years, he will deal with the status resolution of the limbo that Puerto Rico has.
Yeah.
He didn't live up to that, correct?
No.
Aren't you giving him a pass here, what you just said today, in terms of that, you know, he's now 4 years later, after the initial 4-year commitment of resolving in his first term, he had to come over and it's still not resolved because you know that what they're granting is $2.5 million to be able to hold the second phase of that plebiscite. Correct me if I'm wrong. And that in itself is not binding still.
Yeah,
so isn't this a game that the Democrats and Republicans have, more so your own party in the States?
But then, for example, he hasn't picked up the phone and called Alejandro and said, Alejandro, if by October 15th you don't approve local legislation as to how you're going to use that money, I'm going to speak out. And you're not going to like the way I'm going to speak out. He hasn't taken that initiative.
Alejandro being the current governor.
The current governor, who is his ally, a Democrat just as I am. Alejandro and me were invited to Orlando in 2012 to campaign for him. I mean, we were both at the bottom step of the Air Force One staircase. Right. And in fact, I think it was this same guayabera I was wearing.
That's a long wear then.
Yeah.
But let me just hold on a minute, Mario, because we have now a person living in New York, an ex-president who didn't do as much as he could in a very popular 8 years that he had, that being William Jefferson Clinton, Hillary Rodham Clinton, who is now living in the state of New York, was our senator for a while, being really, you know, bantered as the leading candidate for the nomination in 2016. You will be probably working for her if she actually runs. Is there any hint, by the way, that she's going to run? But here it is, because I remember back, again, I may be wrong, in 2008, June 8th of 2008, Hostos Community College in the Bronx. I remember because I asked Hillary about the status of Puerto Rico. I mean, it was like trying to grab slippery soap in a bathtub of water. And she's still evasive. This is your candidate. This is a candidate that you work for, Roberto Prats. And you can't get a commitment out of her either. Why? Why is it that the Democrats in particular, understanding the situation of the colonial status of Puerto Rico, don't take a stand?
It ain't easy to be green, as one of the Muppets would say. It's not easy, because as long as you have people voting on the mainland who support other things, they will pay more attention to the voters of the diaspora than they pay attention to the results of the votes in Puerto Rico. So that is a difficult situation. But on the other hand, I think if the statehood party had won the elections, in addition to winning the plebiscite in 2012, and we were on the verge of doing so, if you had had a Republican governor working Republicans in Congress, a Democratic member of Congress working Democrats in Congress, and you would have had a president with the commitments that he had made with respect to Puerto Rico and with the plebiscite results that we have, I don't know what would have happened in these 4 years regarding political status, but certainly more would have happened than what has happened up to now. And yes, the president appropriated $2.5 million. We're appreciative of that. But you have to follow through on that. That's not enough.
President Obama hasn't followed up.
I think that there's still things that he could do that he has not done yet.
Like what?
Well, like for example, there's all this discussion in Puerto Rico, and you know, you've interviewed Eduardo Batia, I've interviewed the mayor of San Juan. There's a big fight within the governing party in Puerto Rico regarding what political status option they should be supporting. Well, some of that is pie in the sky, Commonwealth with French fries and ketchup. There are things there that if they attempted to have the federal government approve, then I would come up with statehood plus. I want statehood with 3 senators instead of 2. Oh, but that's unconstitutional. Just as unconstitutional as some of the things that they are suggesting. I mean, there are things in some of the proposals that are being aired in the Popular Democratic Party that were dealt with and resolved at Fort Sumter in South Carolina back in 1861. And you cannot have a state legislature picking any, meeny, miny, mo which federal laws will apply to Puerto Rico. You cannot have full American citizenship in Puerto Rico if you don't have a federal court in Puerto Rico where you can take a case to defend your civil rights as a U.S. citizen. You know, it cannot be that only those that can afford to fly to Miami have the right to petition the government for the redress of grievances in the judiciary branch. You have to have a district court. And, you know, there are simply things that the administration should be providing guidance already, saying, you know what, that doesn't fly. This might fly, but this doesn't fly. And we're not getting that guidance. And as long as you have the governor and legislators here saying, oh, this is possible. Oh, well, the governor says it must be possible. Even though we have a number of reports from House committees, from the White House Task Force on Political Status saying it's not possible. For example, there's the White House report and a House report very clearly explain why free association is called free association. And it is because the treaty that you would enter into, the agreement that you would enter into between Puerto Rico and the U.S. on a nation-to-nation basis, it's a treaty between 2 independent nations. And the reason it's free is because that association, any of the 2 parties can walk away from it for any reason whatsoever, unilaterally. And it is clearly explained in a House report, and it's explained also in the White House Task Force report. Now, most voters are not going to go into nitty-gritty of that. But you still have politicians within the governor's party say, oh no, it'll be a very sacred agreement. It'll be there forever. No, it will not. It's not worth the price of the paper it's written on. It is a binding agreement as long as both parties decide to bind themselves to that. So guidance is needed from the president. Guidance is needed from the White House. We need leadership from this president. And that's something that people are asking for in a number of different issues. But this is one issue where we need leadership from the president.
You spoke about the 5 governors and 5 terms, and we were driving with a gentleman today who actually works in government who said, I hate politics. And we asked why, and he said, oh, you see this bridge that we're driving over? He said it took 20 years to build this bridge. Why? Because every time a new administration came in, they wanted their own design for this bridge. And they would scrap the old ideas, and they would have to put their own imprimatur on it. And so this bridge that should have taken maybe a year or 2 to build took 20 years to build. And I was wondering, why is it that there is this turnover in administrations? And I mean, I gather that it's a long explanation, but is there a throw the bums out mentality here? Is it, what is it that's causing the people to again and again double down on this dysfunction?
Because you have to reach out. There are things that should not be part of the political discourse. if only you reached out and maybe accepted an amendment here, an amendment there, and get it done with support from both sides. For example, in 2010 or 2011, Governor Fortuño appointed a bipartisan committee, like 5 or 6 members, including the 2 minority leaders of the Popular Democratic Party in the legislature, to devise pension reform. We need pension reform. We needed it then. So he creates this committee to deal with that, and the intention was to reach a private agreement that after the elections he would hold a lame duck session, special session of the legislature, and approve it on a bipartisan basis. What happened? In September of election year, the candidate for governor of the opposing party, now governor of Puerto Rico, pulled his 2 minority leaders out of the committee, spoke badly about the efforts that were being made, and then suddenly politicized pension reform. You know what's the funding ratio of our retirement system?
No.
New York's is probably around 70 or 80 cents on the dollar. Illinois, which is the state with the poorest situation, has about 55 cents on the dollar. Our funding ratio is 4 cents on the dollar. For every dollar in commitments to retirees like me, there's 4 cents in the bank to pay for it. If something needs consensus, that is it. And the mechanism for consensus was created. It was followed through for a year and a half, and then suddenly, for strictly political reasons, we're pulling out. We're forcing them to pull out. They did not want to pull out. They were forced by their gubernatorial candidate to pull out. And then political rhetoric began. It cannot be that way.
But that goes also for the opposing party. So that was in the 2012 election. Do you think that anything would have happened if the reverse were true, if it had been a popular Democratic Party and then reaching out to the Pehme, to the New Progressive Party? Isn't it clear that it would?
I cannot say, because there's been no communication between the current governor and his predecessor. Contrary.
Wait a minute, between Luis Fortuño, who was the who lost,
and Alejandro, there's been no communication.
And Governor Garcia Padilla hasn't called even to say hello?
Except for the letter that Fortuño left in the drawer of the governor's office, which is a tradition that Governor Fortuño has always followed. There hasn't been any communication between them. And there should.
And you know this for a fact? I
know this for a fact. Governor Alejandro Garcia Padilla, just like every other governor, has a governor's club. And you've read the book, The President's Club. Former governors are some of the best people that you can consult on things. And you can consult it on a private basis, and they will keep it private. Governor Fortuño did it with several of his predecessors, just to mention 2. Governor Sila Calderon and Governor Hernandez Colón. He would consult with them on a regular basis. That is not happening now. And I can say that for a fact because I'm very close to Governor Fortuño. But I would not doubt that that is probably also the case with Governor Rosselló and Governor Romero, who are the other 2 living pro-statehood governors, in addition to Governor Fortuño. And that can change. There's still time to pick up the phone. Or if you're scared of being rejected, there's still time to call a former Secretary of State and former Lieutenant Governor and have him arrange things. Be the consigliere. The Puerto Rican consigliere.
And now you work for Politank, which is the only bipartisan or nonpartisan government affairs law firm. As a bipartisan lobbyist, per se, how is that going in Puerto Rico?
Well, it's going great. First of all, I can say that there's not been one phone call or one appointment that has not been granted to me since I've been, but I guess it's in part because it's me and the way I always dealt with everybody regardless of party affiliation in the past. But we have 50-50 division here between pro-stateholders and pro status quo members of the firm. And so it, you know, it allows us to get things done. You don't want to be at a firm lunch or something like that.
Oh yes, we do.
Yeah.
Can we have the camera rolling? City and State will cover
yeah,
it.
or see some of the emails that we shoot at each other, the chats that we do on the internet and all that. But we have a lot of fun working together, and we feel very satisfied at the accomplishments that we reach precisely because we're friends and partners, and we get things done.
We thank you for your time, but before we leave, we need to bring you back to Somos.
Sure.
Again, the conference is coming here. You know Assemblyman Felix Ortiz, who is still presiding it. You know the legislature in New York.
Yeah.
There is a governor who says he's our amigo, Governor Cuomo.
Yeah. And it was been at, in fact, he came here, I think it was before he actually took office.
Yes.
He was here for a few hours. And I think his first trip, his first out-of-state trip as governor, where he promised that he would limit his out-of-state trips, was precisely to Somos. And
As governor-elect.
And we should feel very honored about that.
Right. Today's Puerto Rico. What does it need from the Somos Conference of the New York State Legislature? What do you ask Felix Ortiz and the colleagues? And I'm not just talking to Puerto Rican and Latinos, because a lot of members of the legislature and the city council come here. What is Kenneth McClintock's message to them as members of the diaspora and as legislators of the great state of New York?
I would say that in view of the fact that the Empire State works in part because there is cross-aisle conversations and negotiations and consultations, that maybe the best gift that Somos could bring to Puerto Rico this year is to emphasize to leaders in and out of power in Puerto Rico, on one side of the aisle and the other, is that the Empire State model of having communication across the aisle works in New York and could work in Puerto Rico. And if you can get us to speak more to each other here in Puerto Rico, that probably could be the most important legacy of this year's Somos Conference.
As we say in Spanish, más claro no canta el gallo.
Kenneth McClintock, thank you so much for joining us. It's a great pleasure. You know, before we came here, Gerson was saying we have to sit down with Kenneth McClintock, and we were said, Kenneth McClintock. He said, no, he's really Puerto Rican. He's
McClintock Hernandez.
But it's a great pleasure, and it's such a pleasure to have such a candid conversation about your politics.
Glad to have you here.